weekend on Book TV. Up next, live, in depth, with author, playwright, and essayist Gore Vidal.
In a writing career spanning over 50 years, Gore Vidal has produced 22 novels, more than 200 essays, a memoir, and numerous short stories and screenplays. This month, one of his plays has been revived on Broadway, and the 7th installment in his American Chronicles series, a novel called The Golden Age, has been released. Here to join us on Book TV's In-Depth series to talk about his life and work is Gore Vidal. Mr. Vidal, thanks for being here.
Very nice to be here in my hometown.
Do you remember the first time you put pen to paper?
I sort of remember. I must have been about 6 or 7, and I was starting to read fairly grown-up books. And I had read a book. I didn't like children's books, but I had been given one called The Duck and the Kangaroo, a tale of unnatural affection. The duck was in love with the kangaroo. And I immediately started to write a book, what I thought was a book. It turned out to be pretty much The Duck and the Kangaroo, but I think that was the beginning, that when I saw something that triggered me. There was a movie called The Mystery of the Blue Room, I think it was. And that really started me off. I must have been about 8 or 9, and I really sat down to write a novel. Didn't get terribly far. Then when I was about 16, I used to go over to the Library of Congress, and I wrote half a book. I don't know what on earth it was about, but I just go there every day and write. The rest of the time I was reading. And what time there was left, I was reading aloud to my grandfather, Senator Gore, with whom I lived pretty much till I was 10. And he was blind from the age of 10. And he got me to read for him. And I was his favorite grandchild, or child, because I loved reading, and his other children hated it. And he used to chuckle rather grimly after I'd been reading for 5 or 6 hours on end. He said, "You know, John Milton's daughters went blind reading to their father." He would chuckle happily to himself. "And now let's get to bimetallism. This is an exciting subject. Free silver, you see, was the basis of my founding the state of Oklahoma." This was, and we'd be off to the races. So I was getting great history lessons along with reading skills. And it was, what was nice about it, I got to talk to him. Grandfathers, particularly if they're senators, and blind and have to be looked after, aren't the best of company. But I was his reader, so I came into another, I wasn't just a grandchild, I was a reading person, and he held them in high regard.
Let me tell our audience a little bit about what we'll be doing this afternoon and how they can join in this. This series called In Depth, we have the opportunity to spend 3 full hours with authors who have spent many years writing and producing books. Gore Vidal will be with us for the next 3 hours. We'll be talking for about 20 to 25 minutes and then opening up our phone lines for your questions for him from all around the country. We'll put that phone number on the bottom of the screen during this first half hour so you can begin thinking about your questions and calling into our studios here in Washington. And we do very much welcome your participation. Lots of opportunity for discussions of all sorts. When did you decide that writing would be your career?
I don't think I ever decided that. I wanted to go into politics. That was the family's trade. And I sort of aimed more toward that, but that made something of a historian out of me, because I kept studying the issues as I went along. My grandfather was born in 1870. So between his life and my life, we've covered half that of the Republic, and he had memories of as far back as the Revolution from a great-grandfather of his. So it was natural for me to write, as natural as it was for me to read. I had no clear idea. I was very much a poet, and a very bad poet. Very didactic and thundering. But in my back of my mind, the need to invent worlds was obviously pretty great. So I became a writer in the Army. I was in the Pacific during the war. I enlisted at the age of 17 in the year 1943 and ended up as a first mate of an Army boat in the Aleutian Islands, where I got soaked one day by a wave from the Bering Sea. Hypothermia, is that the word for it? Anyway, I came out of it with rheumatoid arthritis. In the Army hospital, I began to write, needless to say, about the first mate of an Army boat in the Aleutian Islands. I was in the traditional mode, write about what you know. I was by then 18 or 19. And as usual, I'd tried to write, when I was at Exeter, at least 6 novels. And some of them I got very far along, and then decided I could never finish anything. So here I was writing this narrative about the Aleutians, the experience of a great storm, which is called Willowa in the Aleut language, and what it was like to be all of those men, I think it was a 20-man crew, in this forlorn lunar landscape with these dangerous seas and extraordinary beaches. The beaches up in the Aleutians are covered with moonstone and jasper and all sorts of precious stones. No indigenous wildlife except for foxes and great black ravens. And a lot of guys went crazy up there, really, in the Quonset huts, because you never saw the sun. And I didn't go crazy because I had a book, I had a story to tell. In the Army hospital, I didn't get much done. Then they made me a mess officer in Camp Gordon Johnson in Apalachicola, Florida, Transportation Corps. And that was kind of fun. They wouldn't let me out. I could have had a medical discharge, but they said, we'll keep you in 2 more years because you can still do work like this. And one night, I went to see a movie called Isle of the Dead with Boris Karloff. And it was not as a monster, but as a Greek colonel on an island in which there is a kind of mad spirit abroad. It was a wonderful picture. And after I saw the picture, I was officer of the day, which meant I was on duty at night, in the headquarters. And I went back, and this great headquarters, they had all the lights on, I don't remember why, and there were rows of typewriters. And I went over and started typing, and within a week I'd finished Willowa, my first book that I had ever completed. In due course, after 3 years of the Army, I was let out in 46, gave it to a publisher, and it was published.
Not just that it was complete, but did you know that in fact it was good?
I thought I had accomplished what I had set out to do, yes. Naturally, I was compared to Hemingway. Everybody was compared to Hemingway in those days, if you wrote in a sort of abbreviated, terse style. But the reading I had been doing that influenced me, if anything did, other than my imaginary world and the real world I'm describing, it would have been Hart Crane's The Boat, which I've never seen. I finally met somebody who had noticed that. I was being interviewed in New York, and the interviewer said, you know, I got my master's degree in college in your book, Willowa. I said, tell me about it. And he did, because I'd totally forgotten it. And he said, reread it, so maybe I will. But not on air.
When you look at your relationship with Senator Gore, do you think that was the formative relationship in your life?
Oh, yes. Aside from a passion for politics, which seems to be in the bloodstream of most Gores, as we are witnessing this year, he gave me a profound sense of history from the loser's side. He was from Mississippi. And the Gores come from northern Mississippi, and Albert Gore's family comes from Tennessee, just across the border from us. It's all the same family, and we were Unionists. There were no slaves up there. And we didn't want to secede. And eastern Tennessee did not secede, but all of Mississippi did. And my great-grandfather, Senator Gore's father, enlisted with two brothers. And in due course, he was wounded at Chickamauga and taken captive. And one of his other brothers was killed. So my grandfather was then his son. He became county clerk. Well, my grandfather was just able to tell me about the Civil War, what it was like, what the Yankees did when they came and burned the town. And with that history and that politics, a writer's subject was born, if not a writer.
Would you describe your politics?
Well, I wouldn't have written so many books if I could describe it in one sentence, would I? I come out of the populist tradition, which was his tradition. Populist means people, and there was something called the Party of the People at the end of the 19th century. One of the principal organizers in that area was my great-grandfather Gore. And all the Gores were political, and many of them great orators. Well, it was a party to represent first the people who'd been ruined by the Civil War, Southerners, just ruined farmers, and the Bourbons of the Southern, as they call the aristocrats of the Southern Mississippi. They had lost plantations and so on, but somehow they held on to money. We had nothing up in the north. So in order to organize against Reconstruction, the bad aspects of it, and the hard, cold hand of the banks in the north who were buying up the South and exploiting and keeping cotton at 5 cents or whatever it was, playing around with our crops and money, we became violently anti-big banks, what we call corporate America today. Those were the villains. And he continued along that line. In due course, the populists were co-opted by the Democratic Party. And William Jennings Bryan, 3 times candidate for president, was the heroic leader of the party. My grandfather nominated him for president in 1907, or 8, I guess it was, at Denver. And he remembered Bryan was about 36 when he was first nominated. Sort of a windbag, but marvelous orator. But my grandfather said, the thing about Bryan is he never developed. After he made his cross of gold, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. The Gores naturally were free silver, which was what bimetallism was all about. My grandfather started the longest demonstration in the history of any convention when he nominated Bryan.
How long was it, do you know?
I think it was about 2 hours.
A 2-hour demonstration?
Yeah. And they paraded up and down. The place went crazy. And he was speaking as the new senator of a new state, which he'd helped to create, Oklahoma. And so he was a great novelist, and he was a great orator. He said as they were driving away from the convention, it wasn't that convention, it was the next time Bryan was nominated, because Bryan ran and lost. I guess it was the next time. As they were driving away in their carriage from the convention hall, Bryan said, you know, I attribute my success in politics to just 3 things. My grandfather said, I can't remember anything he said. But I do remember thinking why he thought he was a success.
About 15 minutes until we begin your phone calls for Gore Vidal. And here are the numbers. If you live in the eastern half of the United States, 202-624-1111. If you live in the Mountain or Pacific time zones, 202-624-1115. I was surprised in my reading to learn that, in fact, Gore was not your birth name, that you took it as a writer.
It's not true.
That's not true.
I was christened by the Canon Albert Hawley Lucas, headmaster of St. Albans, where I was in school. I was christened Eugene Luther Gore Vidal.
So you chose